The following is a presentation from the Greece Historical Society. The second Tuesdays of the month programs from the Greece Historical Society are sponsored by members of the Greece Historical Society and by the sponsors of advertisements in the newsletter. Space for the second Tuesdays of the month programs is provided by the Greece Public Library. Set in Stone, the history of Cobblestone Masonry, presented by Douglas Farley, the director of the Cobblestone Society in Albion, New York. Recorded September 13th, 2022.
Our speaker tonight is Douglas Farley. He is currently the director of the Cobblestone Society located in Albion, and it's a position he's held since 2017. The Cobblestone Society interprets 3 National Historic Landmark cobblestone buildings and several other buildings. I'm sure many of you, if you've driven out Ridge Road, have gone by that complex. Prior to accepting that role, though, he served as director of the Museum of Disability History in Buffalo, and from 2011 to 2016. And then he was director of the Erie Canal Discovery Center in Lockport. Prior to beginning those positions, he owned and operated his own retail business for 35 years. Graduate of University of Buffalo. So I guess history is your retiree.
That's right.
As always.
I'm reading about it.
So welcome, Doug.
Yeah.
And, welcome.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. Thank you for the invite.
Okay, and I'm going to see you.
Okay, sure. I want to just get my paperwork a little bit more organized. I see my computer's kind of at an angle. I'm going to correct that. So thank you for that great introduction, Bill. My name is Doug Farley, and I am the director at the Cobblestone Museum in Albion. Thank you for coming out tonight, and we'll try to give maybe some new information. I just recently, someone said to me, I think, weren't you here 3 years ago? And I said, yes, but I've added new information. So I put in a little bit of information about your cobblestone homes that were either here at one time in Greece or still exist. So you may have more information about those buildings. When we get to that part of the program, you can feel free to give me more information, because I didn't put in a lot of information, just a couple pictures just to pique your interest. Okay? So, set in stone, the history of cobblestone masonry. So we have 10,000 years to go through, year by year. Does anybody want to leave? I promise not to do that, okay? So how did it all begin? It did begin about 12,000 years ago, when the last ice age was advancing through western New York. And it was about a mile thick of ice or more was completely blanketing this region. And as it moved forward, as it moved south, it created a lot of rubble and mess in terms of the topography. It tried to level everything that it ran into, including the small hills, mountains, and anything that was in its way. So when it retreated 10,000 years ago, it left behind all of that rubble, that glacial rubble, which we now call cobblestones. They sat pretty much undetected in people's fields in the what would become pioneer settlers' fields when we move up into the 1800s. So for 10,000 years they sat there silent. That same glacier that we're talking about created what we know as the Finger Lakes, and did a lot of other amazing things here in our region that we so enjoy. At the time, what we know as the Great Lakes, after the ice age was here, and as it was retreating, I tried to make a so you can see it here. You see at the top it says ice sheet, and you see what says Lake Ontario. The inner line, which you probably can just make out, is the current boundary of Lake Ontario, and the outer boundary of what was then known as Lake Iroquois. What they called it Lake Iroquois. None of us were around to see that. Maybe if some of the local indigenous peoples would have remarked about that. But because of the exit at the St. Lawrence Seaway was blocked by an ice sheet, water built to a much higher level in what we know as Lake Ontario. And the actual shore of Lake Ontario came up to Ridge Road. what we know as the ridge today, that old Indian trail. And as a result, you had two kinds of cobblestones that were found in the fields, because it was at one time a lakeshore. You had stones that were washed by the water and smoothed and made very perfectly smooth. And then you had some field cobbles, which didn't have that wave action and were quite rough. I'm going to show you examples of those as we move forward. Just so we're not here all night, I'll move forward, okay? So what is a cobblestone? A cobblestone is a stone you can hold in one hand. It's from the Old English word cob, which meant a handful. So we have called cobblestones any stone that you can hold in your hand. If it's larger, it becomes a rock, and if it's really larger, it becomes a boulder. Okay? Now we got some pictures. Here you can see the large stone in the center is typical of what you would find in the early cobblestone buildings in the 1820s and 1830s. It's a field cobble. It's very rough and not refined at all. And then you see some examples of perfectly rounded stones, which are the Lake Wass version that we're talking about. You still find those today, of course. When you go to Lake Ontario and walk the shoreline, you see those perfectly smooth stones. Then you see some that are kind of rounded, like we have set in some mortar here, the old original historic mortar, the lime mortar. I'll figure out how to do this without killing myself. So I did mention there was going to be three periods of what we call cobblestone, the three different periods. We had the early period, 1825 to 1835. It was characterized by very basic structures, usually pretty small, and they were utilitarian in nature. They were basically homes or small churches or small schools. And then as time went on into the middle period, 1835 to 1845, they became much more decorative and elaborate and larger in size, and they paid more attention to the size and shape of the stones and making some sort of artistic patterns. In the late period, 1845 to just before the Civil War, they were very, very artistic. And if you travel Ridge Road these days, you'll see some that are just amazing in terms of the beauty of the construction. So I didn't cover it, but I said I would do it, so I got to go back and do it. When I talked to when Bill asked me for an introduction for this, I said that I would talk about the social economic factors that led to the perfect storm for cobblestone architecture. So what's that all about? As these settlers first arrived in the early 1800s, they went into their fields and began to plow with probably an oxen and a simple plow, and ran into trouble in their fields because they had all these glacial cobblestones that were in their way. So they made piles of those and got them out of the way. Their first homes were simple log cabins, which they just cut down trees that were in their way and build a residence. Fast forward to 1824, 1825. You know what happened? The Erie Canal was finished. And all of a sudden, these farmers who had just been eking out a subsistence now had new marketplaces for their goods. And they also could receive goods from other areas. So there was a new affluence as a result of the opening of the Erie Canal. These farmers who had been living in a log cabin didn't want to do that anymore. They wanted to have make a statement about their residence. So they decided a good way to do it. Many of them had worked on the Erie Canal or had been exposed to building the Erie Canal, so they were familiar with some of the new mortars that were developed by the creation of the canal. So they wanted to take these stones that had been in their way, just kind of sitting at their hedgerow, and use them to become homes. This type of home, even though we may think it's just something that we started, it actually had been found, these homes can be found in Europe. And they were in New England, but not to the degree that we have here in the vicinity of Rochester, which is the epicenter for cobblestone construction. So during that 40-year period, about 1,000 buildings were created, largely in New York State. If any were built outside of New York State, it was by a New York mason who moved out of state in the Great Western Migration and built another home or two in another state. only 100 of those homes were built in other states or in Ontario. Over 900 were built here in that 40-year period in New York, and more than 700 of those are within 60 miles of Rochester. So it's a regional phenomenon as a result largely of what I say the driving social economic factor is the opening of the Erie Canal and the success of these new farmers. Does that help answer a question about why these cobblestone homes exist? Okay, we'll move on. This is our ward house. They actually lived in the basement for a period of time. They built it, you can see the first maybe 15 courses of cobblestone, and they were living in the basement before they finished the home. So you can see after the first 15 courses of stone, it really changes appearance. During that time period, the fashion for cobblestone buildings changed. They started using smaller stones. You can see that in this demonstration. So the first stones were large, and you know, you have your characteristic nice even rows, but after that you can see how they have really started to develop more smaller stones and more artistic. If you look at the back of most cobblestone buildings, you'll see that the fronts are beautiful, but the backs are just kind of ho-hum. It's probably the same with most people. They put most of the attention in a home where people are going to see it and not worry so much about what they think of what no one else sees in the back. So this is our ward house. It was basically just this cobblestone box that you see. You can't see because I've cut it off, I believe. It's a wooden addition that took place in the 1900s. But that was very common, that these early cobblestone buildings, people got cramped and they wanted more space, so they usually put on a wooden addition after the Civil War. Of course, the Civil War changed everything. Not only in terms of how we as Americans live, but it was the start of the Industrial Revolution. It was all about using new modern materials for building. You have, of course, brick, you have sawed lumber, you have everything that you need at your command. And building a cobblestone building often took up to a year. That you could build any other form of home much quicker and much more economical. So that's kind of was the death knell of cobblestone construction. So what was it all about? How did they go about creating taking these stones and using them to build something that would last? So the stones were basically gathered by the family unit. The father, the mother, the sons, the daughters either went out into their field and made piles of stones and brought them back to be sorted. I'll tell you how they sorted them in just a second. And then they took an oxen and went to the lake shore and picked up stones like anyone would do today if they wanted to do a stone project with smooth cobblestones. Someone asked me, well, did they stop building them because they ran out of stones? No. It goes without saying, you go to the lake shore, you find them in abundance. Every time the farmer turns over his field, he's got a new crop of cobblestones waiting to move. So we had never run out of cobblestones, so that wasn't the reason why cobblestone architecture fell out of favor. Another thing I say with cobblestone architecture, because the 1900s, people were a little bit tired of their cobblestone house. You'll find many examples of where people have taken stucco and covered over the original stones because they fell out of favor for a while. I related to more modern times when everybody had to have a certain style of home these days, like a split level. Then after a period of time, you didn't have to have a split level and you didn't want one. So these things change. Here's how they sorted the stones. The wooden board is called a sorting board, and the metal rings are called beetle rings. So the family unit would use these to sort the stones into piles of similar stones, sizes, and colors so that you could make even rows of cobblestones. You needed the even rows so that your mortar would be nice and tight, it wouldn't be jagged, it wouldn't be rising and lowering, and creating a situation where water could get in between the stones. How did they stick the stones together? They use something called soft lime mortar. I had no idea about this until I started working at the Cobblestone Museum, but if you take limestone, a perfectly hard, very solid stone, and heat it to a high enough temperature, you end up with powder. It's called lime, and that powder can then be added sand, and water can be added, and you have soft lime mortar. This is the mortar, the glue that holds the cobblestone building together. I got a picture of a lime kiln where they would heat the limestone in the bottom there. They'd throw the wood in at the top. They'd have a fire over 1,000 degrees for about a week, and if you have enough limestone in there and enough fire, you can take your limestone and create a lime mortar with it. You had to beat it up pretty bad at the end to break it into powder, but it certainly wasn't like beating up a limestone and having it sit there. But usually you had 2 or 3 of these in a row because these businesses that were creating this mortar needed a constant supply, and one kiln would take about a week to give you a little bit of mortar, but not substantial enough, not enough to build a house. So these lime kilns were constantly busy. Erecting the walls. Does everybody know the cobblestone building these days? What you're seeing on the outside is a veneer of stone. What really is holding up the building is called a rubble wall. R-U-B-B-L-E. That's about a 12 to 16, 18 inches thick solid wall, which is just basically stone upon stone with no attempt to make rows or sizing. It's held together with the same lime mortar, but it's really the support for the building. On the outer, past that, going out the outside towards the outside of the building, you have the beautiful veneer of cobblestones, which are laid in perfect rows, oftentimes embellished with special mortar techniques, which we'll see in a second. And built. You could take the rubble wall usually went about a foot higher than the outer wall, so that they were always ready to add more courses. But the problem was you could only do about 4 or 5 courses of stone, and then you had to let the mortar set. Because if you go any higher, the mortar was too weak to hold it until it was set. So it takes about a week for the 4 or 5 rows that you had built one day to set. So that, oftentimes, if you drive out into the country, you'll see cobblestone buildings right next to each other. The mason and his team of salespeople were very effective at getting the neighbor to build a cobblestone house too. That way he always had someplace to go to the next day while his mortar was drying. And very often you'll see very, very similar cobblestone buildings side by side or just up the street. Here's an example of that rubble wall. It's actually sitting on a rubble wall. This is a wall in our cobblestone church. There's an example of just the stone upon stone, and you can see the depth of that window well. That's the depth of the rubble wall. And in this case, that's just an extra piece of rubble wall that we took from another building that had fallen down. But that's the principle. It's not rows, it's just supporting stone. There's an example of a building that has trouble. You can see, maybe hopefully see in this, the exterior masonry and then the inner rubble wall, which is probably more mortar than it is rocks, but that's what's supporting the building. How does that happen? That happens when you don't take care of your roof. If you don't keep the roof up, water gets between that veneer and the rubble wall, and as it freezes in the winter, it pushes the walls apart, and you have that situation where the walls will actually crumble. If you keep a roof on a cobblestone building, it will last forever. Now that I've said that, you tell me examples where that didn't. It's a pretty hard and fast rule. Okay, each of the individual masons, they were proud of their work. Some people say, well, they hid their work so that others couldn't copy it. I don't know if that's true or not, but it became a very artistic statement. They would use special tools to create patterns in the mortar. They would line up the stones in special formations. We had one particular mason that worked in the town of Gaines, where we're located. His name was Cyrus Witherall. And he had a pattern which is very distinctive, and when I show it to you, you'll know that you've seen it. There it is. That's the herringbone pattern. That's millions of small lake-wash stones in a cobblestone house laid the skinny way in alternating rows so that each one was a little bit different. And sometimes they even sort them by color. You'll have one row of one color and the next row is a different color. This is what we call the hexagonal or Gaines, town of Gaines. It's called the Gaines pattern. You'll find many of these in the town of Gaines. And this is an example of that honeycomb shape. He took a tool and around each of the individual stones, he just depressed it enough to create that pattern. Kind of looks like a honeycomb. There's an example of several different kinds. I like to call the one in the upper left. What does it look like to you? I call it a gingerbread. I don't know why. And to me, it looks like a gingerbread house. And the one at the bottom has, you can see, a special line in between each of the rows. That was one particular mason that used that embellishment in his work. If you drive down Ridge Road, you can find each of these within a mile of each other. Really don't need these notes, so I don't know why I'm using them, other than I don't want to forget something. So this is a slide where you see the distribution. Pat was showing me he has this in some of his work that he's created for your celebration. 90% of all cobblestone structures in New York are within 75 miles of Rochester. Wayne County has the highest number. And there are a few in Paris, Ontario, a few in Michigan, and other states around the Great Lakes. No more than 100, 900 of them here, and one as far west as Colorado. So that particular mason got pretty far away. And here's that map I was talking about. Pat has it as well. Oops. You can see Monroe County has 133 to its credit. Orleans County has 111. Wayne County has the most at 210. It'll decline a little as you get further away from the lake. And Erie County only has 2. City of Rochester only had 2. Now I think they have 1. And Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, and Allegheny have none. And then all of the area just north of New York City has none. So it's our phenomena, okay? We should be proud of it. This is an example of the cobblestone building built in Ann Arbor, Michigan. As you can see, it is very typical of what we built here. What I don't see are the coins, Q-U-O-I-N-S, and I didn't tell you what those were, but I will shortly. Coins are the limestone or sandstone cut stones that you see at the edge of the cobblestone building. I think they're there, I just don't see them in this picture. Yeah, they are right here, and going up right here. If you could imagine putting a round lump next to each other and trying to turn a corner with round lumps, we're going to have a problem because the water's going to get between those round lumps. But if you have a nice cut sandstone or limestone coin, Q-U-O-I-N, you get a nice tight corner. That's what helps the building to last forever. Paris, Ontario, they had about 8 or 10 built in a short time period. I picked this picture because of the curved corner. That's a piece of masonry work, isn't it? This is one of the largest buildings that I've come across in New York. It's in Buffalo, New York, on Route 20 in Madison County. And it's just splendid. Okay, we get more closer to home. This is 978 North Grease Road. And is the owner here? No.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Any cobblestone owners here? Okay.
Used to be.
Used to be?
Yes,
Go ahead.
I own one.
Which one?
It's in Wheatland, on the corner of North Road and Highway 36, the Ryan Mumford Road.
Oh, okay. And what county is that?
It's in Monroe, just southwest Monroe County.
Great.
It's an early period, 1830.
Okay.
That was
Very good.
Pollock that owned that.
Yeah, I had some information about that family. This was from the Rochester Democratic Chronicle from 2014. It's difficult to find a cobblestone house in Greece. Their unique feature, the stones are used on the exterior like siding, attracted Helen Brodie Pollock and Bill Pollock 60 years ago because there are only 4 of those remaining in Greece. So in 2014 there were 4.
Yeah.
Any Pollock relatives? Okay. The 2 pictures I chose are just examples, of fairly modern examples of the way the house looks, so it's in splendid condition. This is a quote: "Whenever someone sees the house, they're amazed because it's so unique," Bill Pollock said of his property at 978 North Greece Road. "My wife's parents bought the homestead during World War I, and she took it over during World War II, and we were in that house ever since. There are a few houses like this, and we knew that. The other 3 cobblestones in Greece are at 149 North Greece Road, 543 Mill Road, and 4350 West Ridge Road," which we will get into shortly.
Hey Doug, can I ask a question as we go along?
Yeah.
So the porticos on these 2, is that original construction? Because I didn't think the Greek Revival style had porticos over the front porch.
Some of the oldest pictures I found of this one did have that
I
porch.
will tell you right now, I actually got the script from our snapshot.
Mhm.
And where was it here? Where'd she put it? Okay, the front facade, those are wide frieze bands with 4 windows with decorative iron grills.
This
Those
is
are
the frieze at the top.
Yeah,
Yep, those are iron
I'm talking about
grills.
the portico, the cover
The
of the front
portico?
porch.
is a front entrance with a gable roof with Doric columns. Those are Doric columns.
Yeah. I'm not sure what they were added after the original construction. It's quite possible. I mean, they look
And-
like that. But we have examples of that same type of construction all around New York State. Okay, next slide. We're going to stick in Greece for a little while. Here is an example of the house at 4350 Ridge Road in Greece. First photo on the left is 1946. And then we move right to 2010. As you can see, 2010, there was some trouble. Anybody
Yes.
know anything more about this house?
Yep, they'll be featured in Snapshot 30.
It's a commercial plot that, probably 6-8 years ago, they're gonna build a plaza. They said they would save the cobblestone in the plaza, but the plaza has not been built. So,
Okay, and this is an example of the same building,
it's even worse now, yeah.
2018.
Yeah.
And supposedly there was a movie, the guy that did a lot of the newsreels, Ralph of Margaret and Ralph Graham, owned the house during that period of 46 and 47. Her husband did a lot of the voiceovers for the newsreels for Hearst Maritone, and they came to Rochester because he had a gig with WHEC News Radio at the time, and then after that, they since sold it again.
Okay,
That's
very good.
25 years.
149 North Greece Road, circa 1845. That's when it was built, 1845. The image there on the left, I think, is more modern. 149 North Greece Road, does that ring a bell with anybody? Oh, I had some information on that one too. What did I do with it?
Right there, Chrissy Hill.
Yeah, that's the first.
gentleman that's there is Henry Joel Bagley, resident of the Cobblestone House for 86 years. That Cobblestone House served him well. And they're good investments today, believe it or not. Cobblestone homes typically sell for 2 to 3 times the value of a similar wood frame house for size. And just about any location, they command a very high premium.
And the smoker is still there on the property as well.
Okay, yeah, the smokehouse, yeah. I didn't make a picture of that one. I didn't bring the picture of that one, but they had a cobblestone smokehouse, you're correct. 543 Mill Road, Greece. Any takers with that one?
That was the
Major
one.
fire a few years ago. It was demolished 3 years ago.
Okay, so don't go looking for it.
Yeah, and it's now an
Did they knock it
ugly.
right down?
Yeah, the people that owned it, Foo's family had owned it from the 1920s, and a major fire destroyed the back part of the building. The woman wanted a house to live in, so they demolished the house, built a new house, and 3 years later she passed away.
Okay.
So,
There you see 928 Long Pond Road in Greece.
That one, that one did get demolished because they were going to build a medical complex there.
Well, it's vacant today, so it is gone.
Oh, you missed one in front of the, I don't know if you have it.
I have one more slide.
uh-oh, yeah,
3194 Lotta Road, the old Cobblestone Church.
yeah.
You guys recognize that? Gone now.
It's long gone.
I got a little information about that first church. The old Cobblestone Church was called the Free Christian Church. It's had some uses after it was a church too. I'll talk about those.
Oh, that's the church that was the old Methodist church that is related to the Carpenters.
Okay, so it was on the north side of Lotta Road, a few hundred yards west of Long Pond Road, built by J. Putnam in 1844. The date was in the stone gable that you see at the top of the picture. It was used for recruiting men in the Civil War. In 1867, it was purchased by the Greece Methodist Church, and a minister from Adams Basin came each Sunday to preach. Before this, they held services for 26 years in the schoolhouse on Long Pond. 1874, the Greece Methodist Church moved to their new building on Maiden Lane. Is it still there?
Yes, the new building is there. My parents have actually bought the modern school from the district.
So
So
the 1874, I wouldn't call the new building, is that,
it's a brick building now.
okay, so they built another church,
Yes.
which they call it the new church.
Yeah, they call it the new.
This building in the photo was later used as a blacksmith shop, a cider mill in 1941, a dry house, that's where they dried apples, and a carpenter shop for building hay and lumber wagons. Torn down about 1950. Does that square with your idea?
Before my son.
That information came from Keith Suhr, S-U-H-R. Familiar with Keith?
Yeah,
Assistant Director at the Greece Public Library, a Greece town historian.
now he's the director of personnel, but
Okay. From 1931 to, this is where it hit home with me, from 1931 to 1949, 3194 Lotta Road was listed as Lefroy's J.B. and Son cider manufacturers. Because I believe it's the same company that used to make Lefroy's sauce and sell it in small pint jars in supermarkets these days. I don't know who they sold the recipe to, but it's one of my favorite sauces.
And actually, they sold and shipped a lot of stuff to Europe, the Lefroy Drying House.
Yeah, quite possibly, but the name is what got me, because I know I still like Lefroy sauce. I know everyone told me it was made in Rochester for a long, long time, so thank you to Greece and to everybody for making Lefroy sauce. Before I move into my section to tell you about the Cobblestone Museum and who we are and what we do, I just wanted to see if there's any more questions about cobblestone architecture. If you think I've left anything out about the history of cobblestone masonry, ask a question. Yes, sir.
Do they ever count the number of outbuildings that are also in the area?
In the 1,000 that I mentioned, they include smokehouses and other buildings on the property, yes.
Is that the 900?
As Pat mentioned, there is a smokehouse associated with one of the homes here in Greece. Yes?
Oh,
Hi.
hi. I just wondered how many different colors, and is there, rhyme and reason to that, of the color structure of the different stones?
I'm sure there is, but I don't have the chemical answer to that question, but it's based on the chemistry of the particular area where the stones were pushed along by the glacier.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if you did a little research on that, you could figure out what made each stone a different color. Yes, ma'am.
What are the responsibilities of the homeowners? Do they have to adhere to any rules because they're in historic homes?
Absolutely none. If they are in a historic district recognized by the town or the city, then they may be called on the carpet if they let their building go to wreck and ruin.
I had to fix masonry, some masonry on my house when
You had to?
I had one in Williamson. I didn't know anything about
Are you in
masonry,
a,
but I'm up there doing
are
it.
you in a historic district?
It was not a historic building,
Oh, okay.
but it was.
But the good part of that equation is I told you didn't have to do anything, but if you do fix up your cobblestone home, you qualify for tax credits. Every cobblestone building has been deemed eligible for the National Register. It doesn't put them on the National Register, but it just means there's two steps to going on the National Register. One is to be deemed eligible, the second is to submit an application and put on the register. But if you already own a cobblestone building, half the work has been done for you. You're eligible. Now you just need to send in the application and become a National Register home. And as a National Register home, any improvements you put in the building are tax deductible. Yeah.
When they built the houses, did they build the internal 18-inch wall and then put the stone on the outside? Is it different?
They build them contemporaneously at the same time. The rubble wall is usually a foot higher than the cobblestone wall.
But wouldn't they need that before they did the thinner stone on the outside?
Yes, well, that's why I said they went a foot higher. They got much higher than that, it would block access to their next course of stone, so.
Could you use the microphone, because that way we can record it?
Okay, sorry about that, Bill.
Sure. I'm still not clear. Didn't they have to have some kind of wall to retain or hold the rubble in place before they put the veneer of cobblestone?
I've seen wooden structures that were built to almost like scaffolding that you would rise up to put. But everything that I've ever been told, and if you read a record of the building of a home, they talk about the two going up simultaneously. One was always about a foot higher. The inner rubble wall, which would be the supporting wall. The outer wall was just basically the icing on the cake. Yes, sir. Oh, microphone. I'll get this.
Were timbers or whatever embedded in the rubble wall for structure on
Yes.
the interior that they could then build floors or?
I didn't mention it because I don't know a lot about it, and I was going to be embarrassed if I talked about it. But they called them sleeper boards, and that's what they used to attach the plaster and lath to the inner rubble wall. Does that answer your question?
Well, that basically to put up the lath and plaster, but I'm saying structurally, if you had a second floor, there had to be beams or timbers supporting that second floor.
Right.
Were they embedded in the rubble wall?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
built upon?
Right. They would have been resting on that rubble wall, and then the rubble wall would have been continued.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Okay. We can talk a little bit about the Cobblestone Museum. I don't think I need any more for this, but we'll see what happens. 1960. Group of concerned local citizens were upset because they were getting ready to tear down a cobblestone church in the town of Gaines. It had stood since 1834. It was well used, but hadn't been used for about 60 some years at that point. That particular congregation decided to move into the town of Albion. They left the town of Gaines and went to the town of Albion and built a remarkable new Medina sandstone church and just basically closed up shop. So it hadn't been used. Matter of fact, the last use in around 1960 for the building was for cabbage storage. So you can imagine the church was in pretty poor shape. There were a group of local citizens who were concerned about that. They said, what can we do to save this building? We're afraid it's going to get knocked down. So they created a society. How about that? A historical society for the purpose of preserving cobblestone architecture. Just a little after that, the Cobblestone Schoolhouse, which is just up the road in the town of Gaines, there was talk about using that for migrant housing. And that discussion kind of turned some people off. They wanted to make sure that that didn't happen. So the same society that bought the church, bought the school, and it started to grow from there. So those are two of our three cobblestone buildings that we have at the Cobblestone Museum. Formed in 1960, additional buildings have been added. We just bought 2 buildings recently, so we're up to 10 buildings. So we have quite a stable of properties that we're taking care of.
There's a little bookstore behind the museum too.
You get there? Tell them about the bookstore.
Well, it's just a, I don't know, 10 by 10 box.
You know the local history of that book?
I don't know the book.
It's a voting booth.
Voting booth.
Is it really?
Because they have voting houses, they were called, not booths at the time. The voting house is about the size of these 2 tables put together, maybe 3 or 4 tables, I guess. And it served the town of Hamlin as a voting house. Voting houses were actually required for a period of time because I guess similar to one-room schoolhouses, they couldn't be more than a mile or 2 apart. So people had to be able to get to where they needed to vote on a horse and buggy. So they had these voting houses. We received one from the town of Hamlin. They originally wanted to use it for a historical society, I believe, building, but it didn't work out for them. So they gave it to us, and now it's a bookstore. Tell them about the bookstore.
Well, it's just about a half a dozen bookshelves.
Okay,
In a box,
yeah.
and it's on the honor system.
On the honor system, what's the price of the books?
Oh, 50 cents.
50 cents for a soft cover, nothing more than $1 for a hardcover. So,
Yep.
so that's open until the snow makes us close it, and it's open 24/7. So if you're looking for a particular book, or why not just pick up some books? The other nice thing we have is you can drop books off, and you're tired of reading a certain book, and you want to just give it to somebody else, give it to us, so we can sell it for $1 or 50 cents. There's barrels outside of the building that you just put your books in. Yes, sir.
Where is it in Hamlin?
It's not in Hamlin anymore. It's at the Cobblestone Museum.
Oh, okay.
Right on 104. Yeah.
Yeah. Hamlin gave it away, and we are the proud recipients. So it's one of our
How do you move them?
Yeah.
How do you move them? Very careful.
It's just a moving rig. Yeah. Yeah. People actually move cobblestone homes, so it's possible. Oh yeah. There's our cobblestone church I was telling you about. It looks in much better shape than when I was storing cabbage. We've restored it to its pristine condition, and the interior of the church is exactly the way it was in 1890 when they last held services there. We still have weddings there. We have 2 services a year. The same was a Universalist church. The same Universalist church that moved to Albion comes back twice a year and holds a service of it in the summer, actually the 4th of July. And it's still being used for not only for religious purposes, but for museum purposes as well. So we use that big space for, like, if we're going to have a concert, we'll have, like, we just recently had a concert with the Fiddlers of the Genesee. Originally, we thought that we'd go outdoors. That was just this past weekend. We were going to have a couple hundred people on the lawn. But when we discovered that the lawn was full of bees, so, you just can't win. So we went indoors. The fiddler said, well, we can't play with these conditions. So we went indoors at this church. So luckily we still have this church. And there's an interesting story about George Pullman. Everyone familiar with George Pullman? You've heard the name at least. He was the perfecter of the sleeping car, the Pullman sleeping car, which are still basically the principles of that sleeping car are still used today. If you're going to sleep on a railroad other than in your chair, you're going to be sleeping in one of George Pullman's copyrighted inventions, the sleeping car. He originally was from Albion. He had a furniture store. He moved to Chicago and started building these sleeping cars. His car was called, I believe, the Palace car. It was the most elaborate thing you'd ever seen on 4 wheels. And he originally attended, he and his family attended the Universalist Church, which you see there. And when he moved, people knew that he was a very wealthy man. At least at that time, he was probably one of the most wealthy people in the United States, other than the Rockefellers. And they asked him, he says, we want to build this new church, will you give us $5,000? At first he said yes, but then the next day he called him back, he says, no, I'm not going to give you $5,000. He said, you raise $5,000 and I will build that church. So they took him up on that, and they were successful in raising the $5,000 that they had asked him to give them. They raised it themselves, and he built their replacement church, which is a beautiful It's called the Pullman Memorial Church on Courthouse Square in Albion. One of the about 6 beautiful Medina sandstone buildings which are on Courthouse Square in Albion. I just wanted to get that story in. How am I doing? Am I supposed to be done by 8 o'clock?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we have to leave by 8:30. So.
Okay, we'll be done by 8 o'clock. There's the interior of the church. Isn't that beautiful? You see kind of an amazing heating system. Those overhead duct pipes just feed off of a wood stove at one end of the church, and they come and they form that and they lead into a chimney. But all that pipe heats the church. We don't do that anymore, but that was the system. What you see on that back wall is a faux painting. There's no actual depth to that back wall, but the artist who painted that used his techniques to create a 3D effect on the back wall. You can see the beautiful wood-grain pews. Those are not beautiful wood-grain pews. Those are painted white pews, which were then wood-grained by an artist who knows how to do something like that. The church originally had white pews, painted white. And when at a certain point in time, they felt that was gated and they wanted wooden pews, but they didn't have the money to buy expensive, ornate pews. So they hired a painter for much less money, who took devices and created a wood grain on all of the wood in the church. And I defy somebody to come in and tell me that they don't think it's natural, but it's not natural. It's all painted on. Here you have the Ward House, which is the original parsonage for the Cobblestone Church. I told you about that, how they first lived in the basement. It served as the Cobblestone parsonage for the church, but unfortunately, I think the second minister they had in the Cobblestone Church had 10 children. So he started a pattern of not living in the parsonage, and then that kind of passed down through time, and eventually it became a private residence. The interesting story about the Ward House, it has a connection to Horace Greeley. Everybody's heard that name, right? Yeah. Remember from high school why that name was important? His mantra was, "Go west, young man," right? And he encouraged people to move west to take care of or to be involved in the westward expansion, or you're going to make a killing overnight. But he actually owned this building. He's the New York Tribune editor. He was that. And he also ran for vice president in the 1800s with a situation where he did not win. That's kind of his fame, it calls to fame. But he owned the building because his nephew, he co-signed a mortgage for his nephew. His nephew died. The nephew's widow wasn't able to make the mortgage payment, so he came to town to see what it was all about. And he lived in it for probably about a year before he sold it. Horace Greeley. The next picture shows the interior of how the Ward House looked. Ward House. This is Horace Greeley's residence for a year. It's decorated in Victorian furnishing. All of the antiques date to that period. There's probably 5,000 Victorian artifacts in this building. By the way, all of our tours are guided tours because all of our artifact collection is on open display. When you come in, you can actually see it, get right up next to it, and know that it's the real thing. There's no ropes, no boundaries. Everybody comes in and actually gets the experience.
How many people do you let in at a time?
In the Ward House, no more than 20. That's if we have 2 doses. We'll keep 10 on this level, we'll put 10 on another level. There's the living room. I think that's the stereopticon on the table there.
Yeah.
Here's our schoolhouse, District Number 5 schoolhouse, built in 1849. You can see the coins there pretty well. I didn't talk about them before very much, but those are sandstone coins in this particular building. This is a very unique building. In 1849, only a handful of these were built. It's a cobblestone veneer over a wood frame building. So it doesn't have a rubble wall. It's got a wood frame, which plaster lap was put over the wood frame. This is our more recent acquisition. We call it the Bag House. Actually, it's one of the oldest buildings on our property. It dates to 1818, which is very early for the town of Gaines. And it was the home of the blacksmith and his wife, Joseph Bag and Nellie Bag. We also have their blacksmith shop as a working blacksmith shop on our museum campus, which I'll have a short picture of here soon. But who knows what the set of steps is all about? Carriage steps, right. When the ladies step out of the carriage, they don't want to make that 2-3 foot jump. They want something there to get them so they don't have to jump down into the mud. This particular home is all decorated in the 1920s, early electric. You go in and all of the early electric appliances are still in place. Early electric range, early electric refrigerator, early electric washing machine. We've got them all. There's probably another 2,000 early electric appliances in this home. 1920s. Step back in the 1920s. After we got it up and running, I says, oh my gosh, my grandmother could see this. This is our print shop. That's the building on the right in the slide. We have two working printing presses that we operate when we have some of our seasonal events. Other than that, you're welcome to tour the print shop. It's just part of our tour. These buildings that I'm showing you now are all moved to the campus. They were not original to the campus. A harness shop is the white building to the left of the print shop. The name Gates Knickerbocker, he was a local jeweler. Does that ring a bell with anybody? Probably not, we're a little far from Orleans County here. So there's our Farmer's Hall. Interesting story with this. It is a wood frame building. It was originally a Universalist church in the town of Kendall. Anybody familiar with Kendall? That was just over the border, so to speak. They used this as two different churches, first the Universalists and then the German Lutherans for many, many years. And then after it was done being a church, Kendall used it for their town hall. Fast forward to 1978, Kendall wanted a brand new town hall, of course. So they were tired of this building being on their property, so they asked us if we would take it away. So that what you see there was moved, disassembled, board by board, labeled and numbered, and moved to our campus where it was reassembled board by board by 2 unskilled laborers. The building has survived to this day. We recently had to put a little more superstructure into our overhead supporting structure because the walls were starting to go a little askew. But luckily, we were able to get a grant to do that, and I think we're good for another 100 years. Inside of that, we call it Farmer's Hall because inside of it is a collection of probably 2,000 farm tools. Here's our brick house. Our brick house is our administrative building. This is where my office is in the winter. In the summer, I'm just too busy to be in an office. So this is where we have. We also have our research collection. So if you want information on any Cobblestone building anywhere, we have files on it. In addition to that, you don't have to come to the museum now to look at our files because they're all online. CobblestoneMuseum.org. Click on Explore Cobblestone Structures. Click on latest edition of the info base. Then you click on the county that where you want to look into. Then you look on the town. And then you click on the street address. Make those particular clicks and they'll bring up one particular home after you make those clicks. So we've got pictures, early pictures, usually the early 1900s, black and whites. We've got more modern pictures that were taken in the 1940s and 50s. And we have some that were taken since 2018. So Pat's familiar with it because he's been working with it, I'm sure. Our most recent acquisition, Cobblestone Welcome Center. You'll read about that in the newsletter I gave you tonight. We bought this at the end of last year. We're in the middle of a fundraising campaign. We raised $750,000. So all those who said it couldn't be done were wrong. Everyone says, well, there's no money in Orleans County. Those farmers have been very successful still. They are our largest supporters, the farm community. This will be our welcome center where we greet all of our guests and provide them with the information they need. If they're traveling the Ridge Road and just want tourism information, we'll give them what they need to visit the attractions in the region, find their way to Niagara Falls, find their way to Rochester, whatever they need to know, and a wonderful ability to use the restroom. The restrooms will all be accessible, handicap accessible, and ready for any visiting person to use and take care of that need. We'll also have begin our Cobblestone Museum tours there, have a short introductory video while people wait for the tour to go out, and then we'll take them off to see our 10 buildings. So, very happy for that. And that is the end of my slideshow, and I did it right at 8 o'clock.
Any quick last minute questions, comments? Oh, we got something.
This might be in your database, but there's a cobblestone house on Ridge Road. I guess it's the town of Kendall, right? It's just over the Monroe County line.
On the corner of Hurd Road and 104.
Yes.
Got the big red arrow, right?
Does somebody take care of that place?
No one takes care of that. No one has taken care of that for 20 years. We've pleaded with the owner to allow someone else to take care of it. Sell it if you don't want to take care of it yourself. If the owner is, no one's going in there, no, I'm not selling it, no one can do anything with it, and it's going to fall down. So he's going to get his wish.
Thank you.
You see a big red X on it.
Called demolition by neglect.
The fire company has said that deemed that you can't go in there, and no one should be in there, so there's a big red X on it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Presented by the Greece Historical Society.
Want to learn more from the Greece Historical Society and Museum? Then click that subscribe button for more content and hit that bell icon to get notified when there's more bicentennial snapshots. You can visit us on the web at greecehistoricalsociety.org. You can find us on Facebook at Greece Historical Society. You can follow us on Twitter at GreeceNYHistory, and you can stop in at the Greece Historical Society at 595 Long Pond Road.